And now, like to bring on stage, talking about the secrets of using AI. It's all about the data. VP of Engineering at AirBnB, Mike Curtis, who will be interviewed by Ina Fried, Chief Technology Correspondent at Axios. Please welcome them. Straight up.
So I'm really excited in a second to bring out Mike. Luckily, I did improv in college, so I can stall for a sec. So, I mean, I think this conversation that we've been having around artificial intelligence is really important because what we've seen is in a very short period of time, it went from futuristic and not happening to everyone in this room needs to be doing it yesterday. And one of the things Mike and I are talking about is, what do we really all need to be thinking about as we start doing this? What are the questions we should be asking? There's the obvious business ones of, what do we need to do to get into this? What are the things we should be looking at? Where can this help our business? And then there are the questions of, what should we be doing? And so I'm excited to get into both of those. So without further ado, Mike Curtis.
Hello, everyone. Yes.
So as I kind of mentioned, I'm excited to have a broad conversation that we can all learn from, but it doesn't really do to kind of start without understanding how has Airbnb, how have you been looking at this? What is AI? Where do you see it doing for you? What have you been using it for? And what have you learned?
Perfect. Well, open it up there, and it's great to be here, everyone. Exciting to talk about this stuff, and also to represent like some of the really cool work that's happening, at our team, and that's been going on for a while now. So it's exciting. I guess maybe the way that I would frame it is, if you think about Airbnb, like the product that we offer is actually out there in the physical world. Like you're going to go stay in somebody's house, you're going to go on an experience, you're going to engage with somebody. And so really, everything that we do and build in the online product is about facilitating great matches between guests and hosts so that when you go out there into the world, you actually have a good time, right? But then when you think about the complexity of that problem and like creating a great match between these people, millions and millions of guests, everybody has something different that they're trying to get out of their travel experience. They have different tastes, they have different needs. And then on the host side, you've got millions of hosts, and what they offer is also completely unique. Different spaces, different experiences, different neighborhoods, different types of experience you'll have. And so when you think about the combination of all the variables that go into creating that great match, it becomes like almost infinite. And so that's where we think AI technology and machine learning, which we've been using, of course, for years in these problems, is part of the solution to creating those great matches. That's sort of the essence of how we use it at Airbnb.
And I was giving you a hard time when we were talking ahead of this that I use Airbnb all the time, booked it this summer for a trip. We have a 4-year-old. It's like great when you have kids to get a whole house. But I actually feel like I'm signing up for a bunch of work that I'm kind of eager for you guys to take over, which is it still feels like I have to really manually know everything that I'm asking for. How do you envision that changing? If I go a couple years from now and book, how much more is it going to know I'm looking for kid-friendly? And part of it's challenging. I go for work, I go for kids, so it has to ask some of these things. But do I have to know every little thing that I'm asking for, or can the system get smarter?
I mean, I think there should always be a balance of the explicit signals that you give and then the signals that we infer based on your behavior and the things that you're clicking on. And even today, like every search rank that you get on Airbnb, and I'll talk a lot about search because that's really like the core of our product experience, every search is personalized to some degree. And so, and again, because what's right for you could be different than what's right for me. And so behind the scenes, as you're clicking around looking through listings, we're looking at what are things that are common between all of those places so that we can be re-ranking the search results and surfacing the things to the top that you're most likely to want to enjoy. But I agree with you that there's still a lot of work that goes into that process. And if you skip ahead like further into the future, I think it sort of speaks to a bigger problem with travel just in general. Like there's the Airbnb part where you're clicking around looking for listings, but there's also the whole trip planning part, right? And think about when you're planning a trip right now. You have to go to like all these different websites, all these different apps. You have to figure out how you're going to get there, what you're going to do, where you're going to stay, all of this stuff. And it's easy to spend as much time planning a trip maybe as you actually spend going on the trip. It's way too difficult. So you ask me like 2 years from now, what I would love to see is that, you know, when you come to the Airbnb app, we've gotten so good at personalization and recommendations for you that you come to our app and you see a set of itineraries that are basically built out just for you, and you know, maybe even bookable in a single click. So instead of having to do all of that legwork, we're able to offer the entire trip in a personalized way.
So like this year, we decided we wanted to go to Legoland. You know, I had to know it was in Carlsbad because there wasn't a Legoland option. So I type in Carlsbad. You know, we decide we're going to drive, plan that. You know, 2 years from now, maybe, you know, Legoland and Disneyland show up as options. It'll book the flight if you want, that sort of thing.
I think that that's like where we ultimately want to go. I mean, you know, we've stated this quite a bit is, you know, eventually we want to offer the end-to-end trip, right? Because again, travel is too difficult today to plan and do. And we think that through technology, and especially by really investing in personalization, we should be able to make that process so much easier. And then also, as we're like working on the end-to-end trip, hopefully what we can be doing is for each of those things that you're going to do, we can create that as a more intimate experience than maybe what you would get when, you know, you book with like a tour guide today.
And when you have looked back at kind of what you've done already, what have you learned? What has worked well? What have you been able to automate in ways that have been useful? And what are the things that have been way harder than you thought they might be?
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that have worked well really is our investment in data. And so when I talk about search rank, for example, or any of the, you know, machine learning work that we do behind that, it's really all entirely predicated on the data that we have available. And we spent many years developing our data infrastructure capability such that we were able to instrument and log and capture information in a very seamless way and in a very centralized way that it could be used for these types of problems. So I think it's worked very well for us to have an easy, seamless way to be able to leverage the data that we get about how people travel all around the world and then be able to apply that algorithmically to things that yield better matches. You know, that has worked really well, and it's led to things like being able to, you know, have a prediction model for pricing, for example. That was a huge business driver for us, and I think great for our hosts as well, because, you know, the price and value of a listing can fluctuate quite a bit depending on the occupancy and like how much demand there is in an area. Hard for a host to predict that, but we could build a model that would help them set their pricing, leading to higher occupancy and more business. So I think that's an example of something that's gone really well. I think what we're working on now solves a much sort of deeper and more interesting problem, which is, you know, a big predictor of are you going to have a good trip is about expectation management, right? Like if you're going to give a good review on a trip, it's because your expectations were met or exceeded. And so in order to do that, we have to have an understanding of what are your expectations, what kind of feel do you want to get from this place, what type of experience are you wanting to have, and then be able to match you to something that's actually going to meet those expectations. And so there's a lot of work that we're doing now that even building some predictive models that are able to tell us for any listing that you're looking at or that you're clicking on or whatever, we actually have a prediction score behind the scenes of how likely you are to give that a positive review at the other end. And we've trained that model on all of the review data that we have from other people who have stayed there, or also on your own reviews from places that you stayed.
And that does seem like, you know, holy grail's a little far, but like I book a lot of travel. I travel for work, I travel with my family, and I could tell you what goes into that. Like I know this is what is most important to me when I'm traveling for work. This is what's most important. But, you know, whether it's a hotel or Airbnb, the industry doesn't seem to have done that great a job on its own. I mean, you know, taking it out of the Airbnb example, if you go to hotels and TripAdvisor or whatever, you know, it's going to have a bunch of negative reviews for Motel 6 because Motel 6 wasn't the Ritz-Carlton. And it's like, well, I actually, when I read those, I'm like, okay, I get more out of the bad reviews than the good reviews because I learn, are the bad reviews just unrealistic? And if so, great, then I don't care.
Right.
So one thing that AI, it sounds like, can do is really figure out what matters to the individual person, because we all have a fairly long buying pattern or whatever.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's, you know, or some of the areas that we're exploring now is being able to think more about sort of unsupervised learning on things like all of the unstructured information that we have in listing photographs, listing descriptions, everything else, such that maybe an unsupervised algorithm can get better at clustering listings together that have the same kind of feel to them, and being able to do that same kind of process on the guest population to understand where do those clusters intersect in a way that's possible or positive, and then use that as part of the ranking model for search. That's like early stuff, like things that we're just starting to contemplate and experiment with now, but we think it could hold a lot of promise.
So I want to broaden the discussion beyond Airbnb, because I think what we're all trying to figure out is, what should we be thinking about that we're not? And one of the things we were talking about, there's this notion that AI, one of the earlier speakers talked about, a lot of AI problems are actually data problems. Mm-hmm. And this notion that these AI algorithms that we build are only as good as whatever biases and not are in the data sets. And how important is it to know what your data isn't capturing, what biases are inherent in that when you go to use things like AI?
Well, I think anytime you're talking about personalization and you're personalizing on a data set that's been supplied by people, groups of people, anything else, that data is coming from people who have inherent biases in their minds. We all have them, right? And this is part of the conversation we were having before, but the difference, or one of the best ways to combat bias is to be aware of it, right? And if you're aware of your biases, then you can, be proactive about getting in front of them and like really thinking about them. Well, computers don't have that advantage. They can't be aware of the biases that maybe have come into them from the data patterns that they've seen. And so I think it's sort of the responsibility of anybody who's working with large data sets or coming up with things that are going to make predictions and make recommendations and product experiences based on that data, to be thinking about what are the right guardrails to have in place to make sure that any biases that you don't want to come through in the data don't, or at least you're aware of them when they do.
And some of this is about providing a better shopping experience, but certainly one of the things that Airbnb has had to deal with is, this ideal of getting people to open their homes and sort of create community. There have been some challenges in terms of it's only as good as that community, and we all have our biases, whether it's racism, sexism, and stuff. Without getting into too much detail, how much potential is there in using AI to make it better than it is today at removing some of those?
Well, you think about what is the technology trying to achieve? It's trying to come up with a prediction for what's going to be best for you based on your behavior. And so built into that, of course, could be your own biases, right? And what's best for you is like the thing that matches your bias, but it's not what we actually want to accomplish, right? Because we don't agree with that on principle. And so to the notion that I talked about, guardrails, right? Things that we look at, I'll give one concrete example, which is, if we see that a host is rejecting a booking for a window of dates, but then accepting it for somebody else for the same dates, like, why is that, right? Like, that's something that we can look into and have those types of guardrails and signals that come up, which is, maybe what we're predicting in the behavior in the community isn't what we really want.
And also, what are the things, again, broadening it out, that you think people should really be paying attention? I mean, there's sort of the science fiction fears about AI, and there's the, we better get this right now, or we are going to be dealing with this problem in a much more tangible way a couple of years from now. What are the things that are highest on your list of we should really be doing this as a society and as an industry?
Well, I think right now is an incredible time. Like, I don't need to tell you, you've just sat through like an entire day of talks hearing about why right now is an incredible time. But I think the pace of potential change that we could see, even in the next 2 years, 5 years, may be bigger than any of us are thinking or realizing right now. And I think, it does come completely from this combination of like massively available data sets, huge compute power suddenly available to be able to train models on it, and then all of that being available like kind of in the cloud. Like any developer can go and train a massive model right now. 5 years ago, you had to have incredible resources to make that possible. So I think you're going to see a whole lot of new technology coming out that's based on this. Some startup with AI, right? Like you'll see tons of that. But I think what that means is that the potential applications for this and the way it could be disruptive, especially to how people work and how people earn money and what economic opportunities are available to people, could change pretty quickly. And like we hear about the obvious things like, self-driving cars, right? What's going to happen with, with all the drivers? How are they going to make ends meet? Or, analyzing medical scans, right? Where AI technology is being shown to be able to do that in a more predictive way sometimes than a trained doctor. Like that could shift the nature of work for a huge number of people, right? To being able to find, for needing to be able to find new economic opportunity to make ends meet. And so I think as we're developing any of these things, we need to be thinking about how can we leverage AI to also create economic opportunity for people as the nature of work is going to change quite a bit over the next few years. That's one of the reasons why I get excited, of course, about the work at Airbnb, because I think the way that we're using AI creates economic opportunity through hosting, again, in a world where the nature of work is going to change quite a bit.
And do you envision a day, like today I have to say my house is available from X period of time to Y period of time. How far are we from a day where I can say, alert me if anyone's willing to pay $300 a night, and I'll go stay at a friend's house?
Well, I mean, you can actually accomplish that today. You can just leave your calendar open all the time and set the prices how you want. We usually encourage hosts not to move in that direction because we want them to accept when they get a booking. But I think generally we want more and more to be creating tools for hosts where they can get the kind of occupancy that they want and they can earn the kind of living that they want. And the travel and tourism industry is so massive. I mean, trillions of dollars a year are spent on travel activity and tourism activities that sort of, as you see what Airbnb is doing, going from accommodations into experiences and other things that are hosted by people, like things that can't really be replaced by a technology or by an AI, then we're trying to expand the scope of the nature of economic opportunity that we could potentially provide to people out there.
What are a couple things in your life outside of work that you'd like to see AI take on? What are some things that are manual today that you think AI could do a good job with?
Like personal calendaring and schedule management, boy, it would be nice.
I feel like that's one that the tech companies, I covered Microsoft forever, like it's always in the demo. It's always in the demo when it's magically doing the schedule. And real life is, you and I are like tried to meet forever, and it's all these emails, and we ended up having to do a phone call because we could never do it.
I would just love it if somebody would like really definitively solve that problem. I spent so much time chasing calendars around. I think that's one kind of example. And I'll be honest, like that, going all the way from something as simple as calendar management to self-driving cars, I'm really looking forward to self-driving cars. I think that's going to be amazing. I think it's going to be life-changing. It's going to change city infrastructure. It's going to change all these things. I just think, again, like sort of to the note about responsibility, like that's also going to shift the nature of work for a lot of people, and so we should do it in a responsible way. But we shouldn't fear it or back away from it. I can't wait for it.
Yeah, definitely. I think we do have time for one or two questions. I don't know. Do folks in the audience have questions, or I can keep going? Yeah. I don't know if they're microphones. Sorry. I should know. Yeah, go for it.
Please. Yep. Yeah.
Can you summarize the question just in case anyone couldn't hear it?
The question was about some of the open source tools that we've put out, Superset, Airflow being a couple of them, and sort of is that going to continue? And the answer to that is certainly definitively yes. We've taken the mentality of if we have something that is not really like core IP to us, but is a useful technology around data, we absolutely want to put it out there into open source. And we've also taken the philosophy of like, let's actually use the open source version internally, right? So as because you know what happens, right? Like you open source a project, and then it forks, and then you improve it internally, and the external one, we're actually going to use the open source versions internally so that they continually get improved. But yeah, we're really committed to those tools, and we've seen incredible uptake from both Airflow and Superset. Thanks for asking.
Any other questions? Yeah.
The question is, what are we most afraid of? What could be most disruptive? And I like to say, I think we have healthy paranoia. Like, I never want to be that, just because you're in a great global marketplace business and it's hard to, compete with us, That doesn't mean that we want to rest easy, so we like to be paranoid about lots of things. I've heard all sorts of different theories thrown around. I think the most recent one was an article yesterday about blockchain and how blockchain is going to like disrupt all of Airbnb and a whole bunch of other companies. You know, I'll be honest with you, the thing that I think about the most often actually isn't usually external competition or like a new upstart showing up overnight that completely disrupts Airbnb. I mean, we have some of that paranoia, but I think more about, you know, the opportunity in front of us is very vast. Like, there's a lot of things that we could do. But also, like, the hurdle that we ask people to get over to try this thing, right? Try it out. You're going to stay in somebody else's house. It's crazy. But get over it. Like, can we execute really well enough, build enough trust in our community and those types of things to actually be able to achieve what we have potential to achieve? And that, if anything keeps me up at night, it's probably that more than, like, you know, a blockchain startup coming up and disrupting us. Of course, I've said that. Now there's going to be a blockchain startup tomorrow that comes and disrupts us.
But I think also, I mean, and I know it's not specifically your area, but it seems like the biggest threat at the moment is regulation, that people that want to be part of the community, their cities are making it so that they can't.
Yeah, and like, we absolutely have the stance that, like, any city that we operate in, we want to be a positive force, like, for sure. And we're going to work with any city that we're operating in to make sure that we're a positive force in that city. But I would say at the very macro level, like, again, nature of work is changing. People need economic opportunity. We want to be good actors in every city that we work in, but we also have constituents in that city, you know, who are electing their officials who also, you know, want to make ends meet and make ends meet in a way that really can't be automated away. And so I think it's an exciting path forward that we have. Certainly challenges there in every city that we go into, but I think we're approaching it the right way.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Mike. And I think we're out of time, but if you enjoyed our conversation and you want to hear more from Mike, obviously follow Airbnb. Also, I do a daily tech newsletter. You can get it just by going to getlogin.axios.com. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Ina.
Thanks.